All right. Network services and applications. Okay. The internet has become an integral part of our lives with a wide range of applications such as file transfer, email sending, online video, web browsing, online gaming. Because of the layered network model, most users can use various services provided by the application layer without knowing technical details such as communication technology implementations. In all the previous chapters, we have learned the technologies related to the data link layer, the network layer, and the transport layer particularly. Now, in this chapter, we describe the network services and applications such as, DHCP, FTP, and HTTP. So by the end of this chapter, you basically need to understand the fundamentals of various application layer protocols, a lot of them. Fundamentals of DHCP, TFTP, why am I calling FTP DHCP? Fundamentals of FTP, TFTP, DHCP, Telnet, HTTP, DNS, and NTP. We are going to look at each of these, and slowly by slowly we'll be there. So FTP does for us file transfer. Do you want to send files to a server? Do you want to get some files from a server? FTP is going to be your friend, especially if you want to do it in a reliable manner. Now, if you want to send files to a server or get files from a server, but you don't really care, acknowledgement, acknowledgement, all those details, window size, those are handshakes. You don't care about those things of reliability. All you want is something as fast as it can get. Then TFTP is going to be your friend. And we are going to look at each of them briefly. File transfer between hosts is an important function of IP networks. Once in a while, we want to send files from a client to another machine, and sometimes we want to get back our files. It happens. So people can conveniently transfer files using web pages and inboxes, but that is the modern way of doing it. In the early internet era, when the World Wide Web did not come into being and operating systems used command line interfaces, people transferred files via command line tools. And the most common protocols that we used for doing that were FTP and TFTP. But how exactly do they work? We start with FTP. And basically, FTP works on a client-server architecture. There is always a client and a server. So a client wants to access the server for either getting some files or for putting files in the server or to modify something about the file system of the server. So after the FTP client establishes a TCP connection with the FTP server, files can either be uploaded to the server or downloaded from the server to the client. So from client to server or server to client. Now, important, FTP supports two different file transfer modes. Supports the ASCII mode, also American Standard Code for Information Interchange, and also supports the binary mode. When do we use which? So normally, when you want to send a text file, or you want to send a log file, a record of what has been happening, or you want to send a CFG file, configuration file, you want to use the text mode. You want to use the text mode so that we improve the transfer efficiency. When you're configuring some other kind of file, like our image files, our VRP image files have the .cc extension, or you're transferring .bin files, or you're transferring .exe files, or images like PNG, like JPEG, like those things that can't really be transferred to characters. You can't convert it to an A, to a C, to a D. You notice all these files somehow contain text. You notice that? Now, you can't really convert an exe file to, text kind of format. So for that, those kinds of files, we prefer using the binary mode. Think of it like we transfer them to actual zeros and ones in order to convert them. That helps us to maintain their format and make sure all the data is transmitted the way it has to be. Now, FTP has two modes of operation. FTP has two modes of operation. It has what we call the active mode, and it has what we call the passive mode. There are two modes of FTP operation. The active mode, also called port mode, and the passive mode that we also use, that. Okay? Now, the simple thing that is going to differentiate these two modes, before I even talk about anything, is this. You know, FTP sets up two different kinds of connection when it wants to communicate. It sets up a control connection, a connection through which you shall transmit control commands and other controls is different. And it also sets up another connection through which the actual data will be transmitted. Now, normally this connection is on port 21 of TCP, and this connection is on port 20 on TCP. So again, what's the difference between active mode and passive mode? For active mode, the client sets up both connections. The client sets up the control connection. Excuse me, sorry about that. The client sets up the control connection and the server sets up the data connection. That is for active mode. Are we together?
Yes.
And for passive mode, the client will set up both. Do you get the difference?
Mm.
Okay, let us look at the details. Let us look at the details under here. So in active mode, the FTP client initiates a TCP three-way handshake. We have looked at that with port 21 TCP on the server to set up a control connection. Okay, then of course we shall log in. Now, after logging in, the client sends a port command. This is important. The client sends a port command to the server, instructing it to open port P, random port. And then the server initiates the TCP three-way handshake, okay, with the TCP port P on the client to set up the TCP connection. So you can see, this is the point. The FTP server initiates the three-way handshake for the data connection. The FTP client initiates the three-way handshake for the control connection. And in passive mode, the FTP client initiates the control connection, and the client initiates also the data connection. It initiates both of them. Most of the things are the same, apart from the fact that this time it is the FTP server that sends a passive command to the FTP client, instructing it to open port, a certain port for the data connection. The configuration commands are straightforward. You first enable the server, FTP server enable. If you're running IPv6, you'll want to add FTP IPv6, then server enable. And then you set up a local FTP user. We have already looked at AAA. You go ahead and set up a user in AAA view. So you go to AAA, and then you create a local user, specify the username and password. In this case, we are using irreversible cipher. You not specify the password, and then you set up the privilege level depending on what you want that user to be able to do. And then you set up the service type as FTP. Now, this is more important than ever, specify the FTP directory. Okay? If you don't specify the FTP directory, you're not going to be able to transfer any file. Okay, we have an example here on the client end. On the client end, you just need to say FTP and you specify the IP address of the server. And then you'll get connected. Once you're connected, you can run any of these commands depending on what you do. In most cases, you're running one of these two, either get or put. You're either getting something from the server, that's equivalent to download, or you're putting something to the server, that's equivalent to upload. Now, in this case, we are giving an example, but using a router as a server and another router as a client. That will make it easier for us to configure. So you can see we get in the system view of our server, and then we enable FTP server on the server, go to AAA and create a local user called admin1234 with an irreversible cipher password, hello world at 6789. And then the local admin privilege level is 15, the highest privilege level, management level access. And then local user is given access to only FTP services. And then local user admin, that FTP directory, we set up the FTP. What this command means is, in case someone connects to you over FTP, they will have access to that directory. Now, if you don't set up an FTP directory, you can connect, but you can't do anything. So it's like you can't connect. Now on the server, basically, of course, after giving it the IP address, this network must be configured, must be reachable, as you can see. After giving it the IP address, you just need to say FTP, specify the address of the server, and then in this case, we are using the get command, SSL VPN, and then it is working it out for us, and it shows you that files have been downloaded. And then for TFTP, the basic difference is that TFTP uses UDP. FTP uses TCP. Are we together? And since we are using UDP, TFTP does not even need any kind of authentication. Communication will just occur. Just request a file and you just get a reply, period. No tricks, nothing. For instance, request for writing a file, okay? And then you get confirmation, then you write your what? Your file. The server acknowledges. And downloading, it is the same scenario. Request to read a file, you get confirmation, and you go ahead and work it out. No tricks, no TCP, three-way handshake, no what. We just communicate straight away. It's fast, and it has cases when we can use it. The commands are simple. You see this time, we are assuming TFTP is enabled on the server. You see, you just say TFTP, specify the server, and then the file name you want to get. You see that? You see, in FTP, this is different. In FTP, when you try to FTP, there is trying to reach, you see, all around here, TCP is working until you get what? Until this point here. You see, the server is ready. You've been connected. It first establishes a what? A connection. TFTP, I don't care. It's God's will. Whether I work hard or not, it will not work if it's not God's will. If I was supposed to be poor, I will be poor. As in, I don't care. No big deal. If the file is there, get it. If it's not there, no big deal. If you can reach the server, put the file. If you can't reach it, no big deal. But FTP wants to set up the what? The connection first. And if the connection fails, nothing will happen. So for TFTP, you do not need to log into the TFTP server and only need to enter an IP address to the TFTP server and the corresponding command. Now, currently, VRP devices can function only as TFTP clients. So you might have problems trying this lab in ENSP. Unless you have your server, you use the cloud interface, you have your server outside. You install the TFTP server on your laptop, and then you use the router as a client in ENSP to access the server, which is now your laptop. And then we have Telnet, which we have, I think, have we used Telnet? Telnet facilitates device what? Device management. Okay? But I've said in several cases it is what? Insecure. Transmits data in plain text. Beside that, it works on port 23 and it also uses TCP. So it can be reliable enough. What do we use it for? We can manage devices remotely, different kinds of devices. What do you need to do? You just need to set up the V2I interface through which Telnet will access port 23 of the server. Are we together?
Yes.
Okay. So,
before you leave Telnet,
I'm still on Telnet, but okay. You can ask the question.
Why can't a Telnet user configure an IP address?
Why can't?
A Telnet, someone connecting remotely using Telnet configure an IP address.
What do you mean? You tried and you couldn't?
No, I saw that question in the what? In the mock we did and I failed.
Yeah, that means it had options.
Oh.
Did it have options?
Yes, it had.
Hey. The way you're asking is like a Telnet user can't. If that question has options, it means there were scenarios in place. And one of them made it not possible for him to configure. Maybe his privilege level was low, maybe something was wrong. You understand? There were options, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, now when you say Telnet you can't configure an IP address, it's a bit very open.
Okay.
Do you get me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, normally when you configure Telnet, you want to set up a privileged user level, a user privilege level. Now we know we have level 0. Level 0 can't do anything. So if you are given level 0, of course you won't be able to configure an IP address. But that doesn't mean you can't. That's what I'm saying. There were options. Now, depending on those options, there was a scenario that makes it not possible for you to configure an IP address. So I wish you could remember the options. We could know why that Telnet user could not configure an IP address. Without the options, they can't configure an IP address if everything is configured well. Sometimes you will find a question that some FTP client logged into the FTP server, but then they weren't able to download or upload anything. Okay? Now that one is normally common if you don't set up the FTP directory on the server. So there has to be some kind of situation that causes something to happen. So the V2I user interface, we looked at them 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. They are normally 5 by default, and we can expand them up to 15. These are the ones you access the device through if you log in using either Telnet or SSH. Now, Telnet, again, is insecure. Don't use it in a production environment. Only use it for your own labs. SSH is secure because it applies encryption to our traffic, including our login details. So even if someone captures the packet, they cannot see our password. They will see that password, but it will be ciphered. They will say a lot of nonsense. And as I said already, that nonsense can be rebuilt. By the way, it can always be rebuilt. It is only a matter of what do you benefit from the rebuilding it. That is why people don't rebuild your passwords. They are not benefiting anything if they rebuild them. So when you establish a Telnet connection, you get to access through one of these what? V2I interfaces. What does that mean? For Telnet to work, you need to configure V2I. Are we together? you need to configure the VTY user interfaces. And how do you do that configuration? After enabling the Telnet server on the server, you can go ahead and say user interface VTY and specify the what? The user interface you're looking at. You can say 0, you can say 1, you can say 2, you can say 3, you can say 4. Either of them. Or you can say 0 to 1 or 0 to 3. Now what this means is from 0, 1, 2, and 3. What this means is 0, 1, like that. When you say 0, 6, then it is no commas, then it is 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 6. You're configuring 7 interfaces. So after going to the interface you want to set up, you say protocol inbound and you specify Telnet, because we are talking about Telnet. But you can even say all if you want that interface to permit both Telnet and SSH, and you can say SSH if you want it to be for SSH alone. And then you can go and configure authentication mode, which you can always set to AAA or none or password. Now, please Telnet requires you to have some authentication mode, okay? So try to set up password. If you want to do a Telnet lab, set up the authentication mode as password. And then the authentication password cipher, and you specify the password. Are we together?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is a configuration example. In this example, we are using a PC as a Telnet client, and you can see we have them on the same network so they can communicate. So we shall configure this guy as a server, okay? Telnet server enable, go to AAA, set up a username and a password. And then you give that username a high privilege level so they can do a lot of stuff. This is where the trick, I think, for that question was, okay? And then local user, Huawei service type, you permit them to access Telnet, you quit, go to the user interfaces and do what? And set them up. Are we together?
Yep.
And then when you go to the client and try to access, they ask you for the username, they ask you for the password, you feed them in as required. You notice that the authentication mode has been set to AAA. That is why we are using the AAA username and the what? And the password. If you don't set authentication mode AAA, if you say authentication mode password, when you try to log in, they will ask you for just the password. This one will not come. That's Telnet. Are we together?
Yes.
And then we have DHCP. Now, I believe I've been talking a bit about DHCP. DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Hosts normally have 3 ways of getting IP addresses, okay? They can get addresses using manual allocation. There is a problem with that. There are too many people on our networks. These people don't know these technical things. For you right now, these things seem like saying Posho or saying DOA. For normal people who did their human resource, who did their BBA, who did their foods and nutrition like me, this is a whole hectic stuff. It's a stress factor. We don't understand this stuff. Now, if you want everyone to go ahead and put an IP address on their host, you know, we don't understand those parameters. Now I hear DNS1. Now I hear DNS2. Now I hear, we don't understand that nonsense, okay? So you want the admin to do that for us. What is the problem with that? Heavy workload. What do you mean? There are 100 people in my company. You want me, because you gave me a job, to go ahead and configure IP addresses on each of their laptops, and then some of them are watching pornography. They don't want to hand me the laptop. How are you going to, I mean, how am I going to do it? It's hectic. And if the network changes, I have to go and start changing each of their heavy workload, okay? Heavy workload. The other problem is low utilization, very low utilization. Sometimes we have moving workers. So they come with their laptop, they sit, they use it, they go away. Now you gave them the IP address 192.168.7.4, and they are moving with it. Whether they're using the network or not, that IP address is out. You can't give it to anyone else. The guy went with his laptop. Sometimes he has changed the company. You have no time to go to that department. I mean, it's low utilization. Sometimes you go to a place, we do some work, we go away. When we come, they have to give us an IP address. When we go, it is a fixed what? IP address. As a result, the utilization is low. And more so, flexibility is very, very poor. Very, very, very poor. So I'm in this building. You give me an IP address that works with the network on which this Wi-Fi is on. I go to the other building to show my report to my boss. There is another Wi-Fi network there. I go now again. We configure another IP address for that Wi-Fi network. I finish presenting my report. I come back. Now I get back in and configure another IP address. Now, if you think this is a joke, some people are actually doing this out there. Okay?
They're suffering.
They are suffering. They are suffering. They have not looked at the next slide that there is this guy called DHCP. Set up a server. He will allocate addresses automatically. No hassle. No hassle. When a host comes in range, whether he's connected by cable, whether he's getting through wireless, when he's in range, he sends a request, hey, can you get me an IP address? The server says, cool, I had 4 left. Please use this one. When you're about to leave, let me know so I can give it to someone else. Everything is very automatic. And they have their language, they understand. They talk and things work. What are the benefits of this system? Before you look at the benefits, please understand that it is also working in a client-server architecture. Okay? Now we talk about the benefits. The very first one is unified management. I have my pool of addresses there in the server. It automatically knows that 2 of the addresses are being used. I have a total of 252. That means I'm remaining with 250 addresses. It knows that 70 are in use. And the beauty of it is when you disconnect and go home, after some time that we are soon going to see is called the lease period, after some time, the server will take back his address and he can assign it to someone else. That is what we call the IP address lease. You don't actually own the address. I just lease it to you. When you're done using it, or even if you're still using it, after 8 hours, I need to renew it. If I don't renew it, it will come back to my database and I can give it to someone else. So there is no wastage. There is leasing. So there is good utilization of the addresses and everything works right cool. Are we together?
Yes.
How does it work? How does it work? There are a number of messages. This slide is showing us there are 4 messages that we need to work with. The blue messages go from the client to the server. The red messages come from the server to the client. Let us look at them. The first one is a DHCP discover. Now, John, what about that? When a client, when your laptop connects your network at the university or work, when it reaches a network, when it gets connected, the interface senses that it has been connected. It sends out a DHCP discover. That is, if it has been configured for DHCP allocation, sends out a DHCP. Hey, out there, is there anyone qualified to be a DHCP server? Give me some IP addresses. That DHCP discover will be a broadcast packet. What means is it will be sent to a broadcast IP address. So everyone on this local area network receives it. Of course, among those everyone, there will be a server out there. And that server has some addresses available. It will pick one of these addresses and send an offer to the client. Now we have said a DHCP discover. A DHCP discover is a broadcast. Now please understand, the DHCP offer is a what? A unicast. Because the server has seen the source IP address of who is, has seen the source MAC address, of who is asking for what? For an IP address. He will send a reply to that MAC address, unicast reply. He says, hey, I'm there as you asked for a DHCP server, I'm there and I can give you 1.1.1.9. Okay, it is available. Are you ready to use it? That's my offer. You can use this IP address. And then the client sends a request, informs the server that I accept the deal. Let me use the address, okay, and your terms. Those terms are probably, by this period is 3 hours, this, the default gateway is this, the DNS server. I accept your terms. Let me use the what? The address. And then the server is like, okay, point taken. You know, in movies you hear the guy say, copy that. So that address gets added on the one feature used. Now, it is important for you to understand that the client needs to send a request as a broadcast frame. Why is it a broadcast? Because sometimes you have more than one what? Servers. Are you guys there? Are you listening?
Yes.
Sometimes you have more than one servers. And our offer, our discover was a broadcast. So each server, listen carefully, each server sends an offer. Each server sends an what? An offer. But only one IP address needs to be used. Now, unfortunately, DHCP does not work like human beings. What happens when a guy receives different offers from some girls? He accepts one of the offers and keeps the others in pending, just in case this one fools around. Okay? So he doesn't actually tell these ones that I took this offer. No. But I'm told that that system is mostly used by the females. Okay? Yeah, when you're texting them, hi there, Dan is interested. Hi there, Timo is interested. There is no, and there is no clear what? Yes. You are just in a pending what? List. So if something goes wrong, all of a sudden you start receiving some messages. Hi there, this day is your silent. You understand? Now, why am I saying this? DHCP works differently. After receiving several offers from different servers, and you select that server's offer, you send the request that I accept your address, but you send it as a broadcast. Every other server on the network must know they accepted Alex's what? Address, so we can take back ours. Are we together?
Mm.
Let those people move on to the next what? Stage. Don't be there keeping them in what? In pending. This is what DHCP does. The request is a broadcast for that sole reason. First of all, we need to inform the server that we are indeed interested, we are going to use his IP address. But if that was the only reason, then it would be a what? A unicast. The thing is, we need to inform other servers on the network that we have considered this one's what? Offer. You can take back yours. And then the server says, copy that. That address is no longer available. It has been taken by someone else. That also is better explained the other way. Okay? When someone accepts your proposal, please don't remain a what? Available. Done.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes, don't remain available. Be unavailable. Someone accepted your offer. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So that is how
Good.
DHCP works, yes.
And now, assuming you have only one DHCP server,
Mm-hmm.
does the DHCP request send is it a unicast or still is a broadcast?
You know, the client doesn't know that there is only one DHCP server.
But no, because if it receives only one IP one IP address, one DHCP offer.
Actually, it doesn't know that there is another offer coming.
Okay.
You get the point?
Mm-hmm.
So the request is always a broadcast. Because
Okay.
let me just pose a small scenario just to explain that so it makes a bit of more sense. Assuming the link here is busy. Let us just assume. Okay? And then this guy's offer hits, bam, I have this address. This one has not yet come, it is struggling. I'm just assuming, which is possible because you know this can be a 1.5 megabits per second link. And this is a 1000 megabits per second link. So this guy's packet reached far before this one even thought of reaching. That is why we say, generally, the client will choose the first what? Offer. But it still will broadcast. So this guy will also get the information afterwards that the guy selected. Are we together? Yes, that is what happens for DHCP. Now, as I said, these servers are very mean. They never give you an address forever. They only lease it. They only lease the address. Now the question is, what happens if your lease expires? The server gave you 8 what? Hours, and they are finished. Now the thing is, clients and DHCP are both intelligent. They don't want to go offline because the 8 hours have got finished. So after 4 hours are used up, I'm saying that to represent 50%. They send a request, but this request is a unicast. This is a renewal request. Can you please renew my time? It seems I'm still working. Are we together?
Yeah.
It seems I'm still working. Now, normally, the server will send an ARC that I have renewed. Are we together? And it goes back to 8 what? Hours. Sometimes it doesn't reply. Are we together?
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't reply. So I got 5 hours. I don't know who is that. Please mute yourself.
For me in the presidency, I am tired with this yellow guy here.
Africa. Sometimes I feel like leaving this continent and maybe go to Mbarara or something like that. Okay, the server has given us 10 what? Hours. I mean, you guys, you really know you're in class. When your microphone goes on and there are things happening around you, know you're disorganizing some other people. Learn to mute it. And meanwhile, when you know you're in a silent environment, it's okay, no problem. But then some of you are in an environment, kids are crying, the husband is beating up the wife, you unmute and you leave it unmuted, and then we call you and you really show you're even absent in class, you're even off class, you're not listening to mute. It is not good. Some of us are putting on heavy headphones and all this sound is piercing right into I don't know how they call those things, they are not in network engineering, but it's piercing into something in our body that is going to cause problems. Okay? So let us have some little sensitivity. Know that I'm in class, guys are listening. When this one goes, you know, when my phone rings, I don't receive it, but I silence it. I don't keep it in silence mode because I need to know that someone called. I don't want my boss to call or someone who is demanding me to call and I don't pick. They will say I'm dodging to pay. I want to pick and I tell them a lie. So, after 5 hours of use, we have used 50 what? %. We shall send a renewal request. Now that one is not an independent DHCP message. We still send a DHCP request what? A DHCP request packet. And what happens? The DHCP server receives it. It can reply with an ARC or sometimes it doesn't reply. What happens if it doesn't reply? We wait until we have used 8 hours, 0.75. Okay, that is now tricky, right? At 87.5 usage, when we are left with 12.5, are we together?
Yes.
We send this time again. That is if we didn't receive an ARC to renew. We send again a DHCP request, but this time to everyone. Hi there. I was allocated this IP address, but looks like the owner doesn't want to renew it. I need some help here. The second time at 87.5% usage is called T2, and we send a broadcast DHCP request packet to any server who can give us a response. Configuration commands, enable DHCP, go to the interface, select DHCP, select interface, or DHCP select global if you're using a global pool, okay? If you're using an interface pool, after doing DHCP select interface, you need to say DHCP server, DNS list, and you specify the DNS, okay? Then DHCP server excluded the IP address. Sometimes you have IP addresses for your servers that have been manually assigned. You don't want your DHCP server to go ahead and allocate those IP addresses to laptops. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you exclude them from the addresses the server can allocate. And then you set up the lease. Now, alternatively, we can set up a global pool. You say IP pool, you set up the pool, then you set up the network in which that pool is and its subnet mask, and then the gateway list, what is going to be the default gateway for that pool, the DNS list, what's going to be the DNS server address for that pool, set up the lease, what's going to be the lease period for that pool, then go to an interface and tell that interface, allocate DHCP addresses, but select from a global pool. Now, this is the configuration we've been talking about, okay? DHCP enable, go to an interface, select interface. Then select a DNS server list. Now notice, we are not setting up a gateway when we select interface pool, because the interface will use its IP address as the gateway. Are we together?
Yes.
We are not even configuring the network from which we are picking the addresses, because the DHCP server knows you're obviously giving addresses from my network. Are we together? And you can see that we have set up a DNS server on some address, so we exclude that address. We don't want that address to be given to our client. We exclude it. So we set up the server list, there that. For global, you set up, you enable DHCP, and then you set up a pool. Now for global, because we don't have any IP address global, so you set up which network do you want me to give out IP addresses from, and which subnet masks should those IP addresses be in? What is going to be the default gateway that I'm giving the client? What is the DNS address that I'm giving the client? What is the lease period? And then you quit. Get to an interface and tell it, allocate DHCP servers, but allocate DHCP addresses, but select from the global pool. Are we together? In which scenarios is a discovery a unicast? Well, we can set a discovery. Discovery? Did you say discovery? DHCP discovery. I don't know of a scenario where it's a unicast. Anyone knows of one?
I think
One
from
of
you,
them we are requesting for renewal.
from your
That is not a
explanation-
discovery. For renewal, it's a DHCP request.
I think that's what he or she meant.
Okay, but according to what she, request, okay, cool, yeah, you're right. Okay, some people have angelic abilities here. They know what people are thinking or meaning by when they say what they don't mean. All right, for a DHCP request, when we are asking for a renewal, okay, at time 1, this 50 is called T1. At T1, when we ask for a renewal, it is a what? A unicast DHCP request. But please note, the same renewal, if it is sent at T2, at 87.5% usage, it is still a broadcast. Are we together?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have HTTP, this guy that we always use, and we have already discussed HTTP to some level. HTTP. HTTP is what you normally use when you visit web pages, okay? So when you enter a URL in a browser, the browser can obtain data from a web server and display the content on a page. That is HTTP, Protocol for Communication between client browser and another program and a web server. So the client browser or another program and a web server. HTTP also adopts a client server architecture and uses TCP, particularly port 80. So what happens? The client sends a request, the server sends a what? A reply. Are we together? Now, in the early days, the World Wide Web was mainly proposed to share documents. It was mainly brought in to share documents. There were a few people connected in different places. So the WWW was basically to transmit their documents between or amongst themselves. So because of that, it contained 3 parts. HTML, for those of you who do web design, you know that, okay? For displaying the content, it's a markup language for being able to display the content we are receiving. Then HTTP for transmitting the what? The content. And finally, some way of addressing to specify the location of the what? Of the content. So originally, www was the name of a client application that was used for browsing through those what? Those documents. But it has become a collection of technologies. It now includes HTML, HTTP, and URL. That's what what www is composed of. This is a transfer example. We have a web client is accessing that what? That URL, okay? When that is entered in the address box of the browser, after obtaining IP address corresponding to the domain name through DNS, we are skipping that part, the client sends an HTTP request to the server to request the page. So sends an HTTP request that says, get this page from that host. This is a host name, that is a get what? A get request. And then the message goes, when the server receives the message, it checks in, it's what? The host that has been mentioned. In its file system, of course it's a web server, it finds the file we are concerned with. It finds the file we are concerned with and sends it back to us. Are we together?
Yes.
And there we go with DNS. Now DNS is domain name. Kindly allow me use about 10 to 15 of your minutes. I just want to finish DNS and NTP. They are both very short, okay? Domain name, server. Domain name server. What does it do? Domain name server is basically there to translate our IP addresses to words 192.168.117, so on, so on, so on. There are too many IP addresses, you can't remember all of them. It is better if I want to send a message to Hilda, for me to be able to write www.hilda.com/message. It is easier for me to remember this than she tells me 154.177.16.114. You know, originally human beings set numbers. I think that's even why God didn't create numbers originally. So this is harder to understand. We prefer working with something like that. When you enter a domain name in your browser to access a website, a domain name is resolved, translated to an IP address. The browser actually communicates with the address, not the name. The protocol used for resolving domain names to IP addresses is called the domain name system. Each node on the network has a unique what? IP address, and nodes can communicate with each other through IP addresses, not names. However, if all nodes communicate through IP addresses, it's difficult to remember so many IP addresses. Therefore, DNS is proposed to map IP addresses to alphanumeric character strings. In other words, DNS is just a table. If you want a good example of DNS, go to your host's file on your Windows PC. It is just a table that says john.com is to 8.8.8.8. Alice.eu is to 190. This.h to this. It is just that table. It is the domain name. So when you type in something, it will be checked in that domain name server in that table to see which IP address. So the browser goes looking for that IP address instead. Are we together?
Yes.
So we have normally a domain name, which is the name of the host we want to visit, and the DNS server that maintains the mapping. DNS uses UDP when it's communicating. Are we together?
Yes.
Now, domain names are normally organized in certain ways, but they are divided by dots. So normally we have something like host name, .second level domain, .top level domain, then .root domain. And then the explanation is right there. I'm trying to reach the www second level domain, or their actual name is what? Is Huawei, and their top level domain, it's a commercial entity. Now, they are root servers for .com, and they are root servers for .net. So if your DNS does not know where to find Huawei, it will send the request to the root server of .com. The root server will know all addresses of those .com what? .com domains. That is how it works. Now, there are two different modes in which domain name server queries. There are two different modes. There is what we call the recursive query and what we call the iterative query. Are we together?
Yes.
Now, I want you to listen to this part carefully. For the recursive query, when you send, look at these numbers. When you send your request for resolve, I want, what is the IP address to this domain name? And your DNS server does not have it. It searches for you. Are we together?
Yes.
It sends the request to a more superior server. If that server doesn't have and it is using recursive, it also sends to another one. Are we together?
Yes.
When it receives, it sends to that one sends to you. That is recursive. Now, iterative is different. Iterative is different in that when you ask this DNS server and it doesn't know, it will tell you, I'm sorry, I don't know. You ask the other server yourself. Are we together?
Yes.
Those are the two modes. And that is what DNS is, as simple as that. Now, for those who want to get into the nitty-gritties of DNS and other things, even an upgrade of this is not going to work for you. It's another whole thing altogether that you need to learn about. But that is basically how DNS works. And then finally, we talk about NTP. Now, NTP, I'm going to say very few things about it. It is basically for time. Are we together? It is basically for time. Why is this so important in our networks? Imagine our two routers set up an OSPF neighbor relationship. Are we together? In fact, this is going to be the most important part of my NTP coverage, because you can find anywhere online how it works, but this example you might not find. Imagine this is router 1 and this is router 2. And these routers have set up an OSPF what? Relationship. We said OSPF will send hello packets every 10 what? Seconds. Now let us go ahead and assume, according to this router, right now it is 107 and 56 what? Seconds. According to this router, you didn't do time synchronization. So this router is not running its own time. There was a little of miss in seconds when you were setting the time. So this one is 108, just for clarity, Let us make this 26 seconds. This one is 1, 0, 7, and 51 seconds. Are we together?
Yes.
After 10 seconds, this router sends a hello packet to that router. Are we together?
Yes.
What is going to happen? If the hello packet has a timestamp that it was sent at 26 minutes, it is reaching here immediately, but this one is seeing that it has reached at 51 seconds. So it is old. This guy must have died long time ago. Are we seeing the problem? Do we see that problem?
Yes.
So we need time to be synced always on our network devices. The requirements. Consistent clock of all devices is required in many scenarios on enterprise campus networks. One of the scenarios is network management. When you're analyzing logs, you want to be looking at the right time. You don't want to analyze a log that was sent by my computer. Something was sent by my computer, and it shows a different time in my computer and a different time on the what? Of the network device. How will you verify it was indeed my computer? Okay? Then the charging time. And then several systems working together on the same complicated event. The systems need synchronized time. And then finally, incremental backup. You need to know when that last backup was made so that the next backup can be made. And also for the system time. Now, basically, how does NTP work? It has some big time server, and all the devices are taking the time of that server. It doesn't matter whether it is right or wrong. The most important thing is we are all showing the same what? The same time. Are we together?
Yes.
Now, these ones are normally named in terms of stratum. You have the primary server that directly synchronizes its clock with a standard reference clock through cable or radio. Typically, the standard reference clock is either a radio clock or a global or a GPS. Then you have stratum 2 time servers, which synchronize its clock either with the primary time server or other same level time server. So it will go like that until it reaches your device. Now, stratum itself is just a hierarchical standard. Don't start looking for who is called stratum or which company makes these devices called stratum. No, it's just a standard for clock what? Synchronization. It represents how precise is the clock, how accurate is it. The value of stratum ranges from 1 to 15, and a smaller value indicates a higher what? A higher precision, higher accuracy. The value 1 indicates the highest clock precision. Are we together?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Those questions, meditate upon them. And if you're wondering, you don't even know which direction to start meditating, then you can ask. But if you know the direction,
John,
yes?